everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Pitching Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the week's best health tech stories so you don't have to. I am really pleased today to be joined by SomX's own Jessica Somaru. Jess, how's your week been?
Well, first of all, it still sounds really weird to be called Jessica Somaru, and I don't often hear it. And I've been married a year now, and it still takes me by surprise. My week, well, I'm technically on maternity leave, not doing a great job of that. I'm held together with bronzer and dry shampoo. The bags under my eyes are not designer, and I'm also covered in baby sick for those who are watching this in video format. So I think that's an accurate representation of I joke, but Levi the baby is great and motherhood is great. But it's nice to come and talk about health tech and not talk about nappies for a bit. So much so that actually last week we went, and I did take Levi with me for his first introduction to health tech. Went to Wired Health, and that was really good. And spent the afternoon chatting to various different health tech companies doing different things and listening to some very good keynotes on health equity, on UK Biobank. And then last night, we were lucky enough to be invited to the launch of 28X, which is a new period tracking app. And it's absolutely phenomenal. It's founded by an incredible woman called Amber Vogel, who, for anyone who has been pregnant, will have used the Pregnancy Plus app, which is the app which gives you your fruit, your animal, and your sweet relative to the size of the baby that you're growing. That was her brainchild. So when we're calling our baby a pumpkin, that's all because of Amber. Anyway, phenomenal one. As I recall that she grew that app to about, I think, 150 million users, and
Wow.
then got acquired by Philips, who now own it. And the story goes that she thought she would go and play tennis, and then her brain got too busy. So she decided, what can I do that's going to do good in the world? And has been basically exploring how to create a period tracking app, and I guess women's health app that supports people right across, through all phases of their life, but also bridges this inequity gap where, she's very much of the view that actually current business models don't work. There's a huge data issue in terms of data privacy, particularly in a post Roe versus Wade era. And it was really phenomenal. Surrounded by some really incredible people. It's really, really impressive what she's doing. She's creating this self-sustaining ecosystem where it's free for everyone to access. There will be sponsors. All data exists only on your device, so it never gets uploaded to the cloud. And you can also do incredible things like donate your period blood. And who knew that period blood was more valuable gram for gram than gold? So ladies, I'm telling you, sign up for this wait list. You can make money from your cramps. Who knew? Yes, I'm really excited about it. I think it's a really amazing idea, and it's all aimed at also being able to support women globally, wherever they are in the world, whatever their situation, and being able to kind of give back and be a leveler. So that was awesome. And Levi attended that with me as well and was actually very good.
Did he contribute?
He did some well-timed giggles, which was excellent. It has been a good week. As I say, all that said, I can hear him crying in another room, probably because he's not been invited to make his debut on the Pigeon podcast yet. But there is still time, child. There is still time. How's your week been, Huw?
Not as eventful as yours. It's been a very busy one, but I think productive. Lots of progress made. I think I've got a lot coming up next week, including some fun opportunities at the Panacea Bootcamp.
Oh, fun.
Looking forward to mentoring companies on that program and speaking a bit about what we do at SomX and and how to get your health tech comms right as a founder. So really, really good fun coming up.
Well, it's always good to get out of the virtual office.
It is. It is. And I mean, I'm just really interested by the 28X app. I mean, there's a lot of competition in the space.
Mm.
I'd love to get a sense of sort of why is now the right time.
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. I think I share kind of the same skepticism, and as a period tracking app user, um, and pregnancy app user, as I said, um, I there are lots of solutions that do a similar thing, and I've also, you know, seen a lot of solutions that I feel are adjunct to those kinds of apps, where I feel like actually doing amazing things, but actually as a standalone solution maybe isn't going to have the cut through and the impact that they're looking to have, but actually bring it together with an existing solution that already has critical mass. I think there's huge opportunity there. But I guess what Amber is doing differently is that it's free for everyone, so there is no like paid for premium access. You can like donate £1, for example, which will help you like customize your app, but it might like it would donate that pound then to a charitable cause, for example. And so I guess the difference is that it is for everyone. So it basically is customizable based on your age. So it should serve you from essentially when you start your periods all the way through to menopause and, well, yeah, post menopause, I guess. So there's that. And I think that's quite interesting because generally with period tracking apps and these kinds of solutions, you get a sort of a single interface, and you end up with a distinct cohort of people who use them. And to be honest, most of them have a free service. But ultimately the data then you're collecting from people who you've either paid for is going to be people who have more disposable income, which then inherently means that that data is skewed. But also, it's been widely reported, lots of the data breaches, with regards to GDPR and all of that kind of thing. And one of the things that actually came through last night, which I thought was really interesting food for thought, is that actually there isn't an absence of regulation around AI and data. Actually, what there is an absence of enforcement. And that's why we have the issues we see with data breach and all of that kind of thing, with this really, confidential and sensitive information that actually, the IOC, who is responsible for enforcing things like GDPR, are chronically understaffed and under-resourced, so therefore aren't able to enforce some of these regulations in the way that they were intended. So what it does is, by having all the data on your device, it means that you have to very proactively choose to share your data, and you don't share that with 28X, for example. You can choose that to opt into clinical research. There's often benefits off the back of doing that, so you get a tangible benefit. So it's creating that kind of ecosystem where everyone benefits from the data that's available, but it's very much a proactive opt-in rather than the opt-out, which we see for basically every different way that we share our data. And even things like, there's a lot of educational information on there. So everything from information about starting your first period to domestic abuse, domestic violence, whatever you search isn't trackable. So if you're in a situation where you're experiencing domestic violence and you were searching for support or information around it, if someone looked at your app and breached your intimate privacy in that respect, there wouldn't be a trace of the information that you've been seeking out. So that's super interesting. And I think also the fact that it aims to provide a solution for every community, every demographic, regardless of their socioeconomic status, and wherever they might be in the world, and it can support and serve women living in Ethiopia, as well as it could serve someone living over here in the UK or even in India. So I love that about it. And basically, the way that they're approaching investment, my understanding is that than um, they're negotiating terms that mean that investors, and I quote, don't buy boats, but they do something good with the returns. So I think that's also a nice touch as well. So yeah, genuinely something different, which is a breath of fresh air.
I was just looking while you were talking, trying to find out sort of the kind of financial and commercial model around it, and it being for everyone. I think that's a very interesting piece. I'll be really interested to follow them as they grow and announce more. We have a new contributor to the podcast. Levi has joined the conversation.
Levi has entered the chat. Yes, he has entered the chat because he is hungry and he wanted to give his 2 cents on attending the Epic 28X launch last night as well.
Probably time to move on to our top stories of the week.
Let's do it.
So our first story comes to us not from Healthtech Pigeon, but from our sister publication, Biotech Dodo. We've followed this for a while, and it seemed only right to touch on it in the podcast, and that is that 23andMe has announced it is filing for bankruptcy protection. Its CEO, Anne Wojcicki, has stepped down and has announced her intention to pursue a purchase of the company as an independent buyer as well. Customers are racing to delete their data from the platform after warnings that any future buyer could have access to it. So, I mean, there's a lot going on here, and it seems that users are in fact struggling to delete their data because of the appetite to do so. But Jess,
wow.
Jess, you've had a think about this story. What's standing out here?
I think, to be honest, the writing's been on the wall for a long time. And having not read this latest story in any great detail, one of the questions I do have is there was talk previously of them entering into the weight loss market. And I just wonder what's happened with that. And I've seen Instagram posts and stories doing the rounds with direct links for people to get their data removed from 23andMe. And it does just make me wonder, appreciating that they're filing for bankruptcy for any sale, if the majority, and maybe it won't be the majority of the data, but if, a significant proportion of data is removed, actually, what's the point? What are you buying apart from maybe a logo? And even then, you don't want to keep the brand on. I can't imagine. Anyway, it doesn't have a good rep at the moment. So I just think that it's not a shock. I think they tried quite desperately to keep their head above the water, and I just think it proved an impossible task. I think it's a real shame that it's been quite the fall from grace that it has. It had such great intentions initially, and I think there's something super interesting about let's put the data privacy and all that kind of stuff to one side for the moment, but ultimately looking at how to use the data that people had provided to create what could have been potentially transformational medicines for the future, and it missed the mark entirely on that. And I think that's sad. And so I think then what we saw after that was just these desperate attempts to salvage something, which is where obviously the weight loss comes from, the closing down the drug discovery piece. It's a really sad story, I think. But yeah, my main question is what is it that people are going to be buying, and how much is going to be left apart from a shell once people have successfully managed to fight the servers and remove their data. It's disappointing when I think you see some of these brands, companies which had a pretty impressive rise, and we've seen some really impressive successes have such a significant fall, and I think it really is unfortunately another proof point about how hard it is to sustainably scale a business. And I think, again, it's another fall from IPO. And that sucks. That really, really sucks. We don't have a lot of real success stories that have been enduring post IPO from the health tech space. And I think I don't really know what it means, but there's some. It's a hard. I say it's a hard market right now, but they've been around for a while, and I don't think it's something that's a recent issue. I think it's been going on for a long time. So yeah, as with lots of our stories, interested to see where this ends up. I think intriguing that the CEO, as you said, has stepped down so she can be in the bidding for as an independent buyer, and what her aspirations would be for it. I guess she would know better than anybody else, having been closest to the company and what it's capable of and all that kind of thing. And I'd love to know what her vision for that would be, and what her motivation is, because I think it takes an incredibly strong person to do that. I don't know that I would have that kind of strength and resilience, but I also know that, I guess, speaking from experience, when you have a company of your own, something that you've grown and built, that it's more than the business relationship. You've got emotional ties, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is an emotional decision that she's made. As I said, I think she is more informed than anybody else about whether or not there's an opportunity to do something with the company that she's built. But yeah, we will see. And I'm interested to see who else is going to go in the bidding for it. Who else sees is feeling like a magpie, and seeing a kind of glimmer of hope there.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I 100% think you're right. I mean, even as a business decision, there will be an element of emotion in it for Huw and Jessica, as you say, because she's been at this since the beginning. It's a 20-year-old company now, near more or less, basically, and that there's so much. I've read a lot about the different perspectives that would come into this, and I think there's some kind of very positive perspectives on it, and I've seen some more negative perspectives on it, and sort of how this. But ultimately, it appears to have come down to basically the how to scale has been the challenge for them. It's understanding sort of, once you have that database, once you have all of this, where are the opportunities within that that is presented by, I guess, having a database of genomics quite like this. What's the opportunity for private company? And I think that the drug discovery piece was, on the face of it, possibly the most interesting. So, as you say, the writing does seem as if it was somewhat on the wall when that business fell. I think, as you say, the most interesting point on this is going to be who else is going to go for it, and what will they get? I guess the more valuable. I guess data like this is exponential. The assets and the data that are the assets are exponentially more valuable when you have a larger database rather than not. But do we think individuals are motivated enough to go and delete their data? I mean, I'll be very honest. I'd have to question what's the value of my data to someone from a genomic point of view right now. I mean, I never did 23andMe, but I wonder if people feel that there is much skin in the game on this to remove it, and could that actually be a benefit when it comes to the sale?
So I think the reason people are deleting their data is, first of all, that it's when so most people utilize 23andMe for I don't know if it was ancestry, but it was definitely like just to get a genetic preview, right? Genetic preview of who they are, where they come from, and maybe some potential genetic predisposition with certain health markers. And so my understanding is that lots of people feel frustrated because that data, they uploaded it for their own benefit, and that data was then taken and used in ways that they didn't realize it was going to be used. And I think what the reason for people deleting their data now is they're seeing an opportunity to remove their data from that set and being used in ways that they haven't given permission for. And frankly, they feel frustrated, and I would too, that ultimately people are benefiting, continuing. So people have already benefited financially from the contribution of that data, and they're now going to benefit further in ways that I've not given permission to. And frankly, I use Circle. I years and years ago, I did Circle as a similar experiment, self-experiment. And if this scenario was playing out in the same way with Circle, I would be doing the same, because I feel like by being able to remove my data, I'm now able to take agency over something I didn't realize or potentially wasn't able to have agency over previously. And as I think I've talked about before, when I did that, I signed up to it. I didn't check the terms and conditions. I have no idea how that data is used. I didn't think twice about that at the time because it wasn't really a conversation back then. Now it is. Now I'm informed and I understand the risks. And also it just sucks that I could, as I've talked about with 28X, there's a prime example there of where I can proactively opt in and decide exactly how that data is being used and who is benefiting, and I get to benefit in kind. And so I think that because people feel duped by 23andMe, they're seeing it as the opportunity to kind of right that wrong. And that's probably why they're looking to delete their data. And yeah, I don't blame them, because I would if it was me.
The big question that's covered in some of the analysis is if insurers could pick up the data as well. And I can, I think we've touched on this before in conversations about bioethics and the use of genomic data by insurers. It would be unprecedented for that level of genomic data to fall into the hands of health insurers who could. I mean, there's not a huge amount to stop them from using it at the moment. So it is a question. As you say, I think the most interesting piece on this over the next few weeks few weeks and months is who's going to be the buyer, and
what's their intention? Is it honourable?
Exactly. Are your intentions honourable with my data? Very, very interesting will be whether Huw and Jessica can come up with a convincing buyout plan, and not least given that board members rejected her last few attempts. So there will be what is it that the board was expecting from bankruptcy that they couldn't get from management buyout? So very much an interesting one to follow.
Watch this space.
Well, with that, on to our next story of the week. Our next story comes to us from Endpoints in Focus, and that is that a California health tech company is letting AI run medical visits from intake to diagnosis. Very interesting story about Keto Labs and a technology called Scope AI that doctors at the healthcare group are using to expand their capacity and treat more patients. So, loaded on an iPad, the technology allows a medical assistant to run much, if not all, of a patient's visit. Caveat that the medical assistants are lower-level healthcare workers who don't have medical degrees. The purpose of this will be to reduce the amount of time clinicians spend gathering information from patients and improve the pace with which they can make diagnoses and treatment decisions, with the intention of seeing between 5 and 10 times more patients. It's a very interesting story. I have my views. I think there's obviously the question that we have sort of technologies that are doing this now in a triage capacity. In the UK, very similar approach of reducing the amount of time that clinicians are actually spending time gathering information. And, we've seen this work. We've seen really positive outcomes. And we've seen patients who maybe don't need care directed, or don't need primary care directed to other avenues, so that clinicians can only spend less time in appointments. But I feel like there's one difference here, which is that this isn't necessarily primary care. So this is very much focused on a cardiology clinic in Los Angeles, and I'm wondering whether this is something that can catch on, that could take off. Would you, as a patient, feel comfortable having a medical assistant run through your issue while being teleprompted by an iPad?
Well, first, let it be said that it's probably a good job that James isn't on the podcast today, because we all know his views on putting AI at the point of patient suffering, or human suffering, should I say. And this isn't technically human suffering, but yeah, I think we're all very au fait with those views, and I think they are very much founded. I guess I find this setup a little bit strange for a few reasons, which is why I am in two minds about it. And whilst I absolutely see the 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 benefit from an efficiency perspective, I think it throws up a lot of questions. So, first of all, they talk about it as an AI physician in this article, but then they flip it to talking about the medical assistant then being prompted by like an intelligent iPad teleprompter type thing, and it's giving physician associates vibes over here in the UK. We have heard some of the challenges with that, and physician associates in the UK generally are not empowered with technology and supporting their role. It is a different thing, but we've heard some of the challenges there in terms of fitting them into clinical pathways and the healthcare ecosystem, and some of the reservations there, and actually consequences of that too. I think I would feel uncomfortable with someone reading off a teleprompter to me, and I would feel like it's good that it's not the technology on its own, but part of me, I think, and this is a really personal thing, would prefer to be sent those questions and me use the iPad to fill them out, rather than a person reading off the teleprompter, because I'm not sure how much that adds. And I guess like a challenge, one of the challenges I see is that not all communication is just from language alone. So obviously this conversation is recorded, and that information is then also taken into the AI platform to provide a variety of different diagnoses. But a part of a consultation with a clinician is about having a discussion, and a human discussion, and a lot of, as I say, the communication is so much more than just the words that I'm using, and that is often a part of how they develop differential diagnoses. And it doesn't really talk a lot about exactly how this technology provides those different potential diagnoses. It talks about the fact that it was trained on 10 million different cases. It's worth saying it has only been used in 450 visits, but it also doesn't talk about regulation either. So it doesn't mention anything about the FDA. It doesn't mention anything about any other regulatory body. And I think that for me is a worry. That should be front and center. I kind of think it would maybe disempower these medical assistants, because what is it that they're bringing to this scenario? And that could be really reductive. Maybe they are really bringing that like human empathy, but I struggle to see how, if they're literally reading off a teleprompter. The other thing that really concerned me was that Alla, who is one of the co-founders of the company, she's a doctor herself. She was basically, she says that she isn't relying on the diagnosis that is being given to her, which is great. And I think we see the same narrative come through with the likes of, clinical scribes like Tortoise and Heidi, where it's the clinician's responsibility to read through the notes, make sure that they're correct. And ultimately the clinician is the reviewer and responsible therefore for whatever happens next. So that's encouraging. However, in the same breath, she's also saying that she might, depending on what the AI throws up, she may not even see the patient. So the patient is coming in, they're they're speaking to someone who's reading off a teleprompter who has limited medical knowledge and clinical expertise themselves. They're being directed by an iPad, which it doesn't say whether there's any ability to for the medical assistant to ask any questions around that themselves based on any knowledge they might have. I assume not. And also, why would you want to? Um, and so you potentially, as a patient, you could go in and sit in front of someone who reads off an iPad and then not see a doctor. And not only is that worse in my but a worse patient experience, but it doesn't when you think about some of the problems we hear about, clinicians who find it difficult to be able to build that human rapport and have those face-to-face conversations with people because they're having to type on their computer and look at their computer screen. It's no different. And but in the same breath, I'm kind of monologuing a little bit here. We also know that lots of people end up going to the doctor who don't need to go to the doctor. So, maybe it does triage out those people where, for example, over here in the UK, there's a big drive to, what is it, like the big five or the big seven, where you can go to the pharmacist to get prescriptions or have consultations on those certain conditions like UTIs, for example. Maybe it helps with that. But also, I think my final concern and challenge is that we've had Junaid, who is a GP, on here before, who's raised concerns that it's great becoming more efficient and it's great reducing the admin burden, but if you're replacing that admin burden with seeing more patients, actually that creates a cognitive burden, and that isn't a good thing for clinicians either. So whilst you are saving them time, are they getting more breathing space? Is their work-life balance any better? Probably not. So it's really hard. I feel like, as an article, there's not enough detail in this to really be able to answer some of those hard questions and really understand properly how it's being used. I can see where it could be valuable, but I think more information needed, and definitely I would love to hear more insight around, for example, like the demographic information around the data that it was trained on, because we want to know that it's not biased. We want to know, I think it actually says they make sure that the tech is accurate to 92%. That isn't the same as saying the tech is 92% accurate. And I haven't looked at the studies that they have to back that up, but I would love to see that research and what they do to make sure. I would much rather hear that it is 92% accurate rather than they make sure it's 92% accurate. So I just think there's some interesting language there.
It all comes down to agency, doesn't it, as well? Like, at the end of it, and as a starter, I don't know how reassured by 92% accuracy I am. I know this is technology isn't eBay, but I won't touch a seller that has under 98%. And I think it does get to a point where even high numbers, when they're not high enough, do make you think and do make you question whether this is the right tech at the right time or whether it is quite ready. I mean, the agency point is a really interesting one, and we you mentioned the ambient scribe piece and technologies like Heidi taught us that are out there. I think I had a great stat the other day, which was there were 110 ambient scribes on the market.
Wow.
Obviously, people have seen the technology and thought, "Wow, this is the place where we can make a difference." The key part of that, and it's the key argument that I think has allowed them to penetrate the market in so much, is that, as you say, clinicians review the data and have the responsibility for the final sign off of those clinical decisions. But if they weren't there in the first place, they're not checking something that checking the recollections are the same as they experienced, but that took the AI enabled them to be more in the room. They are confirming the output of an AI that someone else measured that wasn't a.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a healthcare professional, absolutely, no doubts on that. But it really does raise a question there, and I think the agency of the person to question what the iPad is telling them One of the key points in the article I think is very interesting is that rather than sending you the questions on your iPad for you to answer, um, on your own or anything like that, the presence of the concierge, as they're calling them, which I can't get over, that description of them, is there to help build rapport. And maybe that does touch on the kind of the body language and being able to probe a bit more than the AI says. Are you getting the right responses? And is there some flexibility in that, or don't ask the question the AI says. Probe if you don't feel like you've had an adequate response to the last question. But there is so much that could change the dynamic of a consultation like that if the professional asking the questions doesn't have the agency to go beyond the AI, or whether they do. So that's the bit that I'm most interested to understand, and I think I'd love to hear more about their approach and philosophy in that space. So
One other worry that I've just remembered, which kind of links back to what you were saying with 23andMe around, insurers as a potential buyer. One thing that it mentions in this article as well is that the doctors will decide to see the patient based on what they think or what the insurance needs are. And my worry, based on what we hear coming out of the US in particular, in the US is not the only insurance-based healthcare system in the world, is that an insurance-based healthcare model is not for the people. It's for the insurer, it's for profit. And if decisions are being made about whether or not to even see a patient based on an insurer's directive, an assessment of that information, that to me is quite worrying. And that does make me wonder where we end up. I think it's one thing, a doctor making that decision, but I think an insurer making that decision. But don't get me wrong, I also understand that insurers make decisions about whether or not to reimburse certain treatments and all of that kind of thing. I get that. They're already making decisions based on data. But that feels uncomfortable to me in a situation where someone's turning up and expecting to see a clinician, and then an insurer is deciding that actually, no, that's not what you need, or whatever it might be. I don't know. It's not feeling right, despite the fact that there is in this article an emphasis on, the potential for this to improve patient outcomes. I'm not seeing it right now.
Yeah, for me, it's that how it's being used. I mean, I know the US health system is very different, but that sort of access to specialists, I think, is a very interesting one. I can see a huge opportunity and frankly some overlap with existing solutions and platforms in sort of UK primary care. But as soon as it becomes a specialist issue and you're contacting your cardiologist because you have a concern about something, it really does raise questions for me, particularly on the access piece. You are concerned, yourself. Well, do you want the iPad, whether it's got a human attached or not, to make the call?
Just give me the doctor, damn it!
Yeah. Let me speak to them.
And that is part of the problem.
Fantastic. Let's talk about 4D medical devices. Our final story for today comes from the University of Birmingham, which is that experts enter the fourth dimension to create better medical devices. A new initiative coming out of Birmingham will see experts explore how medical devices could be designed so that they adapt to the fourth dimension, time. And I think, for me, there's a lot that's interesting in here. Jess, I know you had an initial reaction. I'd love to get your read on it.
Yeah, I mean, to Pigeon's point, my experience of 4D is going to the London Eye and upgrading my ticket for the 4D experience. And as Pigeon rightly points out, and actually this is probably where Pigeon's got it from, given the number of pigeons down on the South Bank, but being sprayed in the face with water as I stood in front of a large screen that was taking me on a video tour of London. And whilst, they mention the fourth dimension as time, I feel like the term 4D is just a bit of a distraction here. And, you know, I would have really liked to have seen a much better definition of what they consider 4D to be. And I know that, so they've talked about the fact that ultimately the reason that this 4D health tech exists is to plug a critical gap, as they call it, in medical device design, where traditional methods fail to account for things like growth, movement, tissue regeneration. Examples they've used are like pediatric implants that don't grow with the child, which means that they need to be replaced, which is traumatic for adults, let alone children. Stoma bags often leak because they don't flex to skin folds and to body shapes. And bone implants that don't dissolve or degrade as tissues regenerate. I guess the example that comes to mind is where you have stitches that dissolve, which maybe that is a 4D technology, who knows? So I get where they're coming from, which is like, it's more like this adaptive technology. Or yeah, I think adaptive is probably a better way to use it. And I can understand 4D makes great news. But I struggle to put a tight definition around it. And I think it's interesting work that they're doing. It sounds very cool. UKRI have committed, I think, £1.2 million of funding to the University of Birmingham, who is exploring this from an engineering perspective. Which ultimately the goal is not only that you then get better patient outcomes and a better patient experience, but also that it improves the function of medical devices and increases their lifespan, so that you can, particularly I guess if they're embedded within the body, they have not necessarily an indefinite lifespan, but a much longer lifespan. So I find it interesting. It sounds kind of quite futuristic. And I'm, again, really intrigued and interested to see and understand more about it. I would love to hear more about some of the ideas and aspirations that they have for the program, where they're going to be focusing their energies on like specific innovations, because I think it would be just really cool to kind of go into a lab and look at some of this stuff that they potentially hope to be developing. And it's very cool also just to hear, this emphasis on like hardware, actual devices and things that, can really help improve quality of life for people. Because like I said, I can't imagine how, if as a child you were to have some kind of implant, to then not have to go through the trauma of repeated operations and recovery and healing. You just had it done once when you were a child, or once as a child, once as an adult, whatever it might be. All the better. I even think about things like, I guess, like a coil, like contraception and that sort of thing. They all have limited lifespans, and not that, again, necessarily you would expect them to have an infinite lifespan, but perhaps there is some kind of intelligent engineering that could be done that could increase that lifespan, because I can tell you firsthand, having a coil put in and taken out is really not a fun experience. So the less frequently you have to have it done, the better. And maybe that then means that more people are more inclined to use that kind of contraception. And, again, there are less unwanted pregnancies or less, hormonal complications, for example. It's sounds almost like mythological in healthcare terms, I think. But very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited by this one. I think it's interesting the way the story's been framed and the kind of like announcement of the program, announcement of the initiative, and where it goes. I have to anticipate that this is going to be a kind of open up, big consultative project that goes beyond Birmingham and Imperial, because there are surely advances, innovations outside, particularly in the space of material science, where this is going to be a really interesting question, and then there may already be solutions out there that we can learn from and grow and adapt and create kind of hardware that does shift and that does adapt. And to confirm, I spoke with Pigeon beforehand, and his inspiration was Thorpe Park.
Oh, okay.
Regularly sprayed by the whatever ride or moving cinema option that there was there. So,
has that pigeon just been on the log flumes one too many times?
I mean, twice is one too many times. Fantastic. Well, with that, we will wrap up. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jessica.
Pleasure. It sent my child to sleep, so I don't know whether it's done its job. I hope it doesn't send our other listeners to sleep, or whether that's who knows. He's asleep. That's a good thing for me, but I hope that nobody else is asleep after listening to you and I chat here.
I hope not as well. And if you're drifting off but want to keep yourself awake, there are plenty more fun health tech stories to read in this week's newsletter, as well as some exciting jobs, events, and podcasts that can keep you awake longer than this one might have done. I don't know. I'm glad to hear that Levi is asleep. That can only be a benefit for you for the rest of the afternoon. So with that, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye.